There's a difference between being lazy and being unable to move. And somewhere along the way, you stopped noticing that difference. You labeled your stillness as weakness, your silence as failure, your inability to push forward as a defect of character. But what if that wasn't true? What if the part of you that can't move isn't malfunctioning, but protecting you? We live in a culture that glorifies motion. Do more, fix more, optimize more. If you're not producing something, you're seen as wasting time. But this framework ignores something fundamental. Not all stillness is avoidance. Some stillness is survival. Laziness is one of the most misdiagnosed states of being, and most of the time, it isn't laziness at all. It's a deep, systemic depletion caused by psychic overload. The real question isn't, why can't you move? It's, what part of you is refusing to go forward, and why? Because under that stillness, there is noise. Noise your nervous system has been trying to contain for years. Unprocessed pain that's never been named, only avoided. Grief that's never been held, only buried. Terror that's never been witnessed, only suppressed. This script isn't here to motivate you. It's here to decode you. Not to light a fire under you, but to help you understand why the fire went out in the first place. You are not lazy. You are responding to something your conscious mind hasn't fully grasped yet. Let's begin there. Pain has no language, so it becomes behavior. Pain doesn't always speak in words. In fact, most of the time, it doesn't. It speaks in avoidance, in resistance, in shutdown, in all the ways your body says, I can't, while your mind screams, you should. What you've called laziness is often the residue of unresolved emotion. It's your psyche expressing what your mouth couldn't. When the nervous system is overloaded, the body doesn't ask for help. It shuts down. It goes into conservation mode. This is the adaptive freeze, a nervous system response that doesn't look like survival, but is. You think you're procrastinating because you're flawed, but maybe your psyche is delaying because you're in psychic pain. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. You've been calling it laziness. But what if it's not? What if the force keeping you still is the unconscious crying out, not for discipline, but for recognition? Your body has become the language of your unmetabolized experience. And every time you override that with force, you deepen the disconnection. You don't need more willpower. You need to start listening. The hidden contracts you never chose. From a young age, you were trained to survive. Not consciously, but emotionally. You learned that love had conditions, that presence required performance. And slowly, quietly, you made psychological contracts. If I'm helpful, I'll be accepted. If I don't express anger, I won't be abandoned. If I stay small, I won't be punished. These weren't decisions, they were adaptations. You didn't become lazy. You became tired of living a life that was built on self-betrayal. You internalized emotional enmeshment, the belief that your worth depended on your ability to meet others' needs. You became hypervigilant, scanning every room for emotional danger, even if your face smiled through it. You performed invisible labor, calming others' moods, shrinking your desires, making sure everyone else was okay before even noticing your own collapse. And now, that system has collapsed. Your body doesn't want to play anymore because the cost of performance has become psychic death. This isn't laziness. This is your nervous system trying to rewrite its terms. You didn't choose these rules, but now you have to unlearn them, one exhausted breath at a time. Because the part of you that's frozen isn't stuck. It's pausing to survive. It's the echo of a contract that never served you. And that's the beginning of freedom. Noticing the lie you once believed was love. The persona is exhausted. Jung called it the persona, the mask you wear to survive social life. It's not inherently wrong. We all have one. But it becomes dangerous when the mask becomes the self. You've spent years, maybe decades, perfecting your persona. You're the responsible one, the capable one, the fixer, the achiever, the reliable presence in chaos. But behind that mask, the real you is exhausted. Because you've built your entire identity around being what others needed, not what you truly are. Jung wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is." And when that persona begins to crack, the world calls it burnout. You call it laziness, but it's neither. It's the collapse of an unsustainable self. This is why your motivation is gone, because you're not meant to keep pushing. You're meant to start waking up. The version of you that was always performing, always pleasing, always fixing, wasn't you. It was your shield. And now that it's breaking, something terrifying and sacred is trying to emerge. The real you doesn't want to perform. The real you wants to exist. Shadow work, the parts you abandoned to survive. Underneath the persona lies the shadow, the disowned self, the grief you suppressed, the rage you denied, the fear you numbed, the desire you labeled selfish. The shadow isn't evil, it's exiled. It contains everything you once needed to hide to be loved. And here's the tragedy. The more you rejected it, the more your life began to feel like someone else's. What you're calling laziness might just be psychic rebellion, your unconscious refusing to move forward without its missing parts. Shadow work is the process of reintegration, of reclaiming what you disowned, of allowing yourself to feel what you weren't allowed to feel. You weren't lazy, you were performing goodness at the expense of your wholeness, and now your body has had enough. You're not broken, you're not weak. You're just overdue for the truth. You have energy, but it's locked behind walls you didn't build consciously. And until those walls fall, your laziness is not failure, it's protection. Psychic energy is finite. Where is yours going? Carl Jung viewed psychic energy, or libido, as the fundamental life force of the psyche. It feels thought, emotion, action, and creativity, but it's not infinite. Every thought, every suppressed emotion, every unresolved conflict, they all consume psychic energy. When you're repressing grief, masking fear, faking joy, censoring truth, you're draining your life force. Like a phone running dozens of background apps, even when idle, the system is overworked. This is why you feel lazy, not because you're doing nothing, but because you've already spent your energy surviving. Real healing begins when you reclaim psychic energy from unconscious drains, when you stop performing, when you stop explaining, when you stop trying to be who the world needs and start becoming who you are. Jung said it best, "Energy is like water. It will find a way out even if it means flooding the whole house.
If your psychic house is flooding, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility now to rebuild. Not through force, but through awareness. You're not lazy, you're performing safety. Every time you said, "I'm fine," when you weren't, every time you smiled through pain, every time you prioritized others just to feel safe, you were performing. But no one saw that it was a performance because you did it so well. You became the peacekeeper, the achiever, the fixer, the reliable presence in chaos. But behind that mask, the real you was exhausted. Because you've built your entire identity around being what others needed, not what you truly are. Now, years later, when that persona breaks down, you're not lazy. You're just done pretending. What the world calls laziness is often a rupture in the agreement you made with fear. The agreement that said, if I'm constantly productive, I'll avoid abandonment. If I never rest, they'll never leave. If I never say no, I'll always belong. But the cost of that agreement is exhaustion without meaning, achievement without fulfillment, presence without self. When you finally stop performing, it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like collapse. Because your nervous system doesn't yet know that stillness is safe. So now you sit there, immobile, overwhelmed, ashamed, thinking you failed. You haven't. You've just stopped dancing for safety. And it's disorienting, but it's also the first step toward truth. Sometimes, silence is the only way the soul can speak. You've spent so much of your life explaining, apologizing, defending, performing. Now your body wants to do none of it. And that's not a crisis, that's recovery. We're taught that boundaries are walls, but in reality, boundaries are bridges back to the self. You're not withdrawing because you hate people. You're withdrawing because you've been consumed by them. You're not isolating because you don't care. You're isolating because the cost of connection has been self-erasure. This stillness, this space is sacred, because for the first time, you are not giving your energy away on autopilot. The world will call you selfish, unmotivated, cold, but that's only because it's used to the version of you that overgave. Detachment is not bitterness. Silence is not weakness. They are medicine for an overextended psyche. Your nervous system is not meant to be available to everyone. Your energy is not a public resource. When you begin to protect your energy, people who were draining it will call it laziness. Let them. You are not here to be endlessly accessible. You are here to be whole. Individuation. Becoming who you were before you learned to perform. What if the life you're calling lazy isn't a collapse, but a metamorphosis? Carl Jung called this process individuation, the psychological journey of becoming your truest, undivided self. Not the persona, not the shadow, but the integrated whole being that existed before the world taught you who to be. Individuation isn't glamorous. It often looks like confusion, emptiness, fatigue, because the structures that once defined you are dissolving. You're no longer motivated by fear, but you're not yet moved by freedom. So you float in between, lost in what feels like nothingness. But this nothingness is sacred. It's the space where the false self dies and the real self begins to take form. The real self doesn't hustle to earn love. It doesn't grind itself to dust to feel worthy. It doesn't perform safety. It embodies truth. Jung wrote, "Individuation means becoming an individual,
And insofar as individuality embraces our innermost, last, and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. You are not lazy. You are mid-transformation. Your stillness isn't regression. It's a refusal to keep playing a role that cost you your soul. The fatigue you feel, it's not because you're doing nothing. It's because you're finally not betraying yourself, and your psyche is recalibrating. Let yourself be still. Let yourself mourn. Let yourself unlearn. Let yourself become. Because the version of you that emerges from this silence will not need to be convinced of their worth ever again. You don't need fixing. You need space to feel. You were never broken, just buried, under conditioning, under expectation, under survival. What you've been calling laziness is really just mourning, the soul's grief at having to live as someone else for so long. You don't need to push yourself harder. You need to feel what you've been suppressing. You need to grieve the years you lost, trying to be good instead of being whole. You are not behind. You are not failing. You are not defective. You are finally standing still enough to hear what your body has been whispering for years. Please, just let me be. You don't need fixing. You need permission to feel, to unravel, to unmask, to unbecome what was never really you. This is not the end of your energy. It's the return of yourself. So if you're lying on your bed right now, unable to move, if you're staring at tasks you once could do effortlessly, but now can't even begin, if you're silently hating yourself for being so lazy, just pause and ask, what part of me is in pain right now? What truth have I been too scared to feel? Because beneath the stillness is a voice that's waited years to be heard. And it's not saying, get up. It's saying, welcome back.